What about other characters that you would see in other traditions, even if you and I aren't personally as familiar with them as people in those other traditions, but for instance, the trickster figure, or other sort of anthropomorphized or sometimes animated in terms of like an animal often represents these things, right?
Well, I think the trickster figure that's relatively straightforward. I mean, one of the things that's peculiar about human infants, I think, is how early they develop a sense of humor. Like, it's really remarkable because there's some weak evidence, I suppose, that other animals have a sense of humor, but it's pretty, I mean, the evidence isn't great.
It seems to us that at least apes, when we see them interacting, we project that they're laughing at each other or having jokes. But I guess there's no real way to know in the sense that we are projecting.
Well, they do have proto-behaviors that are humor, like they bare their teeth and they make noises that are vaguely reminiscent of laughter, but It's not like they tell each other jokes. It's not like they do things that are funny for each other or any of that. I mean, that just doesn't happen. Now, it's conceivable that if an ape falls flat on its face, that there's a dominance hierarchy reaction to that, which is to bare the teeth and to look predatory, something like that. And maybe that's part of the proto-development of a sense of humor.
I'm going to watch slapstick comedy in a completely new way now.
So, but human infants develop a sense of humor unbelievably early, and the smiling is part of the social bonding, and little kids are tremendously funny. Like, they get it. They get jokes really early, and they act out jokes and play tricks like very, very early. And so the trickster figure is associated with this human sense of humor, which is incredibly well developed and universal, absolutely universal. And then it doesn't take much to also draw a link between humor and truth, because there's something in humor that's, well, first of all, often what people who are funny do is tell you a truth that no one else will state. Stand-up comics do that all the time. And then there's the idea that, if you're telling a joke, you're in somehow simultaneously beneath and above contempt. Like, it's a bad sign not to be able to take a joke, even at your expense. And I think the reason for that is that, let's say you're about to do something important and you trip a little bit, and so you kind of lower yourself, and you laugh and other people laugh. And what you're indicating is that you can accept the fact that you're imperfect. And so what you do when you accept that fact is you simultaneously elevate yourself, because you say, well, I'm clearly the thing that can make the mistake, but I'm also clearly the thing that can recognize the mistake and put it in its proper context and transcend it simultaneously, which is exactly what someone who can take a joke does.
Which is an indication of status as opposed to the inverse, right?
Well, it's an indication of the existence of the thing that produces status. That's that capacity for transcendence. So that's why, in some sense, the fool or the trickster is the precursor to the savior. Because there's wisdom, there's real wisdom in that ability to, you think, I'm laughing at myself. It's like, that's a very strange statement. It's because you're dividing yourself into two parts there. It's the fool part, that's the thing you're laughing at, and there's the thing that's laughing. And you're privileging the thing that's laughing, and the thing that's laughing is the thing that can take the joke and move on. And people admire that, as they should, because it's an indication of your ability to transcend, to transcend your foolish limitations. And so it's very likely that the idea of the trickster will emerge, because the humorist is always on the cusp between foolishness and wisdom, always. That's the right place for them. That's what stand-up comics do. You can just watch them. They're like, I saw Bill Cosby at one point in Edmonton, Alberta, 30 years ago or so, and he just came out with a cigar and sat on a stool, and he told truthful stories about his family. He had a good edge on them, and certainly included himself in the joke, but people in the audience were hysterical. The guy in front of me was laughing so hard that his wife had to keep elbowing him. I thought he was going to pass out. But all he did was sit and tell insightful, satirical stories about himself and his family. And people love that. And that's why comedians are sort of canaries in the coal mine. You know, there was a comedian in Quebec a year or two who was charged by the Ontario or by the Quebec Human Rights Commission, which I thought was a very bad thing, because if you can't tolerate, it's tyrants who can't tolerate the comedian. And that's like the jester in the king's court, right? He's beneath and above contempt at the same time. He can goose the king or the queen. You don't get to cut off his head, because it's beneath you to do that. And that also means that the jester is the only person who can tell the truth.
So there's almost like an ecological role for that being in a society that is hierarchical.
Definitely, yeah. It's an indication. Well, it takes the tension out of the hierarchy. It points out the foibles of the powerful, and it simultaneously signals the existence of the thing that can transcend frailty. It's really important.